Hello, honored viewers, and welcome to my rules explanation for Legend of the Five Rings. As you're probably aware, Legend of the Five Rings is Fantasy Flight's latest living card game, which means that it's a small core set which provides a number of games you can play straight out of the box, but will be infinitely expandable, or rather indefinitely expandable, creating more and more complex arrangements of cards as the game develops and grows over time. But today I'm just going to explain to you the basics of how you play Legend of the Five Rings so that you can get stuck in the minute you get your core set. I've already unboxed my core set, as you can see here, and taken all the components out. I've even gone through the trouble of making some decks here, which I've already sleeved, because tomorrow I'm going to be playing a game of it with my friend Barry. So make sure you come back and check that out. I've punched out all my tokens here. I've got my fate tokens, my honor tokens. I've got my 5 rings. I've got my 2 starting player tokens. And I've got my dynasty cards, my conflict cards. I've got my 2 honor dials here. I've got my honor cards, and they're double-sided, so I've got my dishonor cards as well. I've got a couple of useful player aids. I've got my roll cards, but those will come in later. We'll mention those when we talk about deck building at the end of the rules explanation. Also got my strongholds and provinces here as well. So what is all this stuff, you ask? Well, Legend of the Five Rings is a conflict set in the world of Rokugan in which the 7 clans are vying for power. We'll each take on the role of one of the clans by building a deck out of the cards from the corset that represents all the people and lands and assets of the clan. We'll then use these assets to go to war with one another to find out who's the strongest. Who are these 7 clans, you ask? Well, damn, I was hoping you wouldn't. Let's see if I can remember. Okay, crane, lion, scorpion, dragon, crab, phoenix, and unicorn. I didn't cheat. So, as I mentioned earlier, everybody's got a deck of cards which is made up of their clan's assets. Now, these are some decks I made and sleeved earlier, but each of your decks will contain a certain number of these dynasty cards. Now, if you're playing the competitive version, it'll be 40 to 45. If you're playing with the core set, it'll be about 30. You'll also have a selection of these conflict cards, again, equal in size to this one. So 40 to 45 for your competitive play and 30 for your core set play, if you're just a couple of friends playing with a single core set. You're also going to have 5 provinces and a stronghold in your deck, which will be these cards here. At the beginning of the game, you'll have your stronghold on the table, and you'll take your 5 provinces. You'll decide which one of those provinces you would like to associate with your stronghold, and you'll take it and put it underneath your stronghold, hidden from your opponent. The remaining 4 provinces will go down on the table in front of you. It doesn't matter what order these provinces are in. These provinces will then be populated with cards from your dynasty deck. At this point, you can actually look at the 4 cards down and decide if you like them. If there's any number that you don't like, you can discard these, replace them from the dynasty deck, and shuffle them back in. Then you draw 4 cards from the top of your conflict deck. You can take a look at these cards as well, and once again you have an option of mulliganing if you don't like any of them, or if your hand is particularly bad, you can draw 4 new cards and then shuffle your first hand back into the conflict deck. Once you're done your mulliganing, you will then take a number of honor tokens and fate tokens. Fate is the resource of this game. It's used to purchase cards and purchase troops as well. It sort of represents the assets of your clan to access its full power in this conflict that's ongoing. Your stronghold will tell you how much honor you start the game with, how much fate you'll get each round, and it will also tell you your influence. This is used for deck building and determines the number of cards you can put in your deck from other clans. We'll talk more about that later on. So now I'm going to draw my starting hand. I draw 4 cards from the top of the conflict deck. Once again, I have the opportunity here to mulligan, which is discarding any number of these, drawing replacements from the conflict deck, and then shuffling my discards back into the conflict deck. After I've got my starting hand, I'll then take my starting fate, in this case 10, as seen on my stronghold. While I've been doing all of this, my opponent will have been doing the same, and at this point we're set up and we're ready to start playing the game. So the first thing that happens in the dynasty phase is that we turn over the cards in our provinces. Players will do this simultaneously. These will be a mixture of characters and holds, such as this one, which can be utilized during the conflict phase or drafted here into play during the dynasty phase. After I've revealed the cards on my provinces, I will also gain the income from my stronghold, in this case 7. My opponent will have 8 because he started with an extra fate for going second, but all of the strongholds in the corset have 7 fate income. This is likely to change as the game develops over time. So now that we've got our fate and all of our characters are face up here on our board, we're ready to start hiring these characters into service. So we don't hire holds or anything, they're immediately effective and they sit here on top of the province offering it additional powers and protecting it. Now at this stage I feel like it's worth explaining how the game is won and lost. You see, we win this game through 2 different methods, either by breaking 3 provinces within out of these 4 and then breaking the stronghold, or by acquiring 25 honor. Now in the corset, acquiring 25 honor is very difficult, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to win that way, but not impossible. It's much more likely that you'll be able to break 3 provinces and then go on to break the stronghold of your opponent. I was lucky enough here to draw my champion. A champion is a unique card in your deck, and you can tell it's unique because it's got this little flower next to the name at the top here. This means it's a special character or something, and that there's only one of them in the deck. Now, getting my champion at this stage isn't really ideal because he's very expensive, and I've only got 7 fate. But if I don't... however, he can sit here on this province indefinitely. Let me explain. All of my characters here that I can hire this round are quite expensive, but I'm going to have to make a decision. I've decided to hire the Caqueta Suchi. This is because his special power gives him extra fate when he attacks while there's a hold in play, and I got that funeral pyre you saw earlier, so this will give me extra money. In order to hire him, I pay the 4 fate cost on the card, which is here on the upper left. So I'm hiring Caqueta Suchi here. He's another unique character. So I pay the 4 character cost, which is here, 4 fate. That goes back into the fate pool. Now there's a unique mechanic in this game. At the end of the round, this character is going to go away and be dead, unless I pay to keep him in the game by overpaying and putting more fate on him. The amount of fate I overpay by keeps him in the game for a number of extra rounds. For example, if I put nothing on him and just pay his cost, he will go away at the end of this round. If I overpay by 1, he will go away at the end of the next round. By 2, the round after that. Thus, I invest in him, and he sticks around for a number of extra rounds equal to the number of fate tokens on him. This is a character worth investing in because his initial cost is 4. So I'm benefiting from this 4 cost over the next number of rounds. If he were cheaper, he might be less worth investing in this way. The minute I buy him, he is replaced with a facedown card from the dynasty deck. Then it's over to my opponent, who will have the same options to play 1 dynasty card from their provinces. And note that we can't play our face-down cards, only the face-up cards. We can also play any special actions we might have on cards on the table, such as the stronghold here. Now, my stronghold action reads, during a conflict, bow this stronghold, and each defending character you control gains +1 military strength and +1 political strength until the end of the conflict. As you might have guessed from all the keyword conflicts in that rules text there, this is basically completely useless to me at the moment, because in the dynasty phase there won't be any conflicts. It'll be pretty apparent which actions ought to be used in each round. An ability is written here on a card like this, and typically has the word action in bold here to indicate that it's an action that can be used at some point. These are typically pretty self-explanatory about when they can be used. So it's worth noting as well that I can use actions on my hold while it's here on the provinces, but each of the actions on my other characters here on the provinces can only be used once they've been bought and paid for. It's worth noting as well that in Legend of the Five Rings, each ability can only be used once per round and no more, unless otherwise specified. So it looks like purchasing Kaiju Suichi here is the only thing that I can actually afford to do this round. So I will pass. If I'm the first one to pass, that means I get a bonus fate from the fate pool. My opponent can continue to take actions, hiring characters from his provinces, etc., until he is also ready to pass. Once we've both passed, the draw phase begins, and that's when these honor dials come into play. These honor dials have entries on them from 0 all the way through to 5. During the draw step, we're going to select a number on the dial in secret between 1 and 5, and this will be the number of cards we draw from our conflict deck. Our opponent will do the same, and the catch is that the difference between our two bids will be the amount of honor that the player with the higher bid has to give to the player with the lower bid. For example, in this case, I've bid 4, and my opponent has bid 1. That means that I'm willing to be more sneaky, utilizing my clan's assets in subterfuge. So I'm going to get 4 cards off the top of my conflict deck here to add to my hand of conflict cards. However, I'm going to have to take 3 honor, which is the difference between my opponent's bid and mine, and give that honor to my opponent. Bearing in mind, if at any point I get to 0 honor, I lose the game. Once the dials have been resolved, it's time to proceed to the conflict phase. I'm going to set up a sample conflict between 2 players using these preset decks and explain to you just how the conflict step works. So as you can see here, we've got the Crane deck from the, this is the introduction deck from the game just that I've set up already. And we've got the Lion deck also from the introductory deck for the Learn to Play game. And they're set up and they're ready to go with the conflict phase. So they've hired their characters in the dynasty phase, with the Lion player hiring a Lion's Pride brawler and the Crane player hiring an automa courtier and a special character, Caqueta Asami. Both of these are quite strong political characters, whereas the Lion's Pride brawler specializes in military, but also has some political application. What am I talking about? Well, in the conflict phase, you're going to be initiating conflicts against your opponent. These conflicts will take one of 2 types. Either political, which is sort of color-coded in blue. These are political conflicts. Or military, which is color-coded in red. Each round, you'll be able to initiate 2 conflicts against your opponent. 1 military and 1 political. So if you're unable to issue a conflict of one type because of your limited characters, then you'll only be able to do 1 conflict. Even if you had an abundance of military characters, if they have no political skill at all, that is to say if they have a dash under the skill, then they cannot initiate a political challenge. I'll show you. This automa courtier has a dash where they should have a military skill. That means they can't commit a military challenge. The Lion's Pride brawler here has a 3 strength in military. She also has a 2 strength in politics and 1 glory. I'll get into the detail of that a bit later. So, starting with the starting player, in this case our Crane player, the player will initiate a challenge. And they'll start by saying, I'm going to challenge this province in a military challenge of this element. There are 5 elements in the game. Can you guess what they are? Well, I bet you can get 4 of them. Earth, wind, fire, water. That's obvious. The 5th one is void. So, each of these elements grants a bonus to the attacking player if they win the conflict. So our Crane player goes first and they say, I'm going to initiate a political challenge of type Earth against the Lion player. So they'll take from this ring pool here, the ring for Earth, they'll put it on the political side, which is the blue side here, and then they'll assign it to one of these 4 provinces on the Lion player's side. Now, all of these provinces are currently face down, which means that our Crane player has no idea which is which. So at this stage, it's a gamble which one they go for. But later, with more information, they may well have a more interesting decision to make here. So let's just go for this this one here with the champion on it. Because if we manage to break this province, and it's extremely unlikely, but if we manage to break this province, we can actually discard the general. we can actually discard the lion player's champion. Having issued our challenge, we then assign attackers to this conflict, in this case the automa courtier. Now, we could assign caqueta Asami as well and just go all in for a big political challenge here. And that might well be the best play. But, so in this case, our crane player decides to go all in political and assign the automa courtier and caqueta Asami to this challenge. These two characters have a political strength of 2 and 3, giving them a combined political strength of 5. So now that the attackers have been declared, it's up to the defender. First, they reveal their province if it's not yet been revealed. So in this case, we've got Pilgrimage. So Pilgrimage is one of the provinces we put in this deck when we built it. It has a strength of 5, and it says, during conflicts at this province, cancel all ring effects. If this province breaks, resolve ring effects as normal. Now, this is very bad for our lion player because, somewhat accidentally, I've set up a scenario in which they can't possibly win and that province is going to be broken. You see, the combined political power of these two characters is in fact 5, which is enough to break that province. Having revealed the province, the lion player can now assign defenders to the conflict. If they don't assign any defenders and the conflict goes undefended, then they will actually lose an honor. Furthermore, the province in this case will break because it's got a strength of 5 and the combined political power of these two characters is 5, which means they'll break the province. So our lion player needs to figure out a way to obstruct the crane player. Unfortunately, he only has this lion pride brawler to defend with. Their political strength is 2. The ability of the crane's stronghold is to bow any participant in a political conflict with a power of 2 or less. What that means is that they will basically be not contributing to the conflict. If you're at all familiar with card games, you'll be familiar with tapping, which is the term used in Magic the Gathering, exhausting, which is the term used in many other card games. If you're familiar with Game of Thrones, you'll be familiar with kneeling. And in this game, it's called bowing. And this is when you turn a card on its side to show that it's exhausted or it's not available for use anymore, it's not contributing, or it can't be used in a meaningful way. So our lion player sees here that they've got a strength of 5 on their province, and that the combined political strength of these two characters is 5. They will break this province if the attack goes unopposed. Furthermore, if the attack is unopposed, the lion player will lose 1 honor. They don't want to do that because they like their honor. They also like their champion, which will can be discarded by the crane player if they break this province. So they assign their lion pride brawler as a defender. Now that the attackers and the defenders have been established, we enter sort of a mini conflict phase wherein the players can play cards from their hands and will take turns taking actions, playing these cards or taking actions from cards on the board until both players pass consecutively, at which point whoever has the highest strength will win the conflict, potentially gaining the power of the ring, breaking the province or the stronghold, and possibly, if it's the stronghold, winning the game. In this case, it's always up to the defender to take the first action. So our lion player is going to have a look at their hand and see if there's anything useful they can do to help out their lion pride brawler. So in this case, our lion player is actually quite comfortable to he knows he's going to lose this conflict because his 2 can't beat their 5. However, the difference of 3 is not enough to break this province. Crane player here needs a difference of 5. At this point, they need 7 in order to break this province because of the lion pride brawler's strength of 2. However, they will still win this province and gain the power of the ring if the conflict is resolved at this time. But they're greedy and they want to break that province. They'll also get rid of the lion player's champion, which is a big deal. So they're going to use the special action of their stronghold. This action allows them to bow a character participating in a political conflict with political power 2 or less. So by using this action, they can bow the Lion Pride Brawler. This is when the card is turned on its side like this at 90 degrees, and it means that this card is exhausted and cannot be contributing its strength to the fight any longer. It also means it can't be assigned as an attacker or a defender in a future conflict. Our lion player is now on the back foot because he's down 5 again, and he's in trouble. So, our crane player took an action. It's back to our lion player. He's got an action because the crane player didn't pass. Our lion player is going to play this card, Court Games, from their hand. This is an event that can be played during this action exchange during a conflict. So we know down here it says action. During a political conflict, select one. Choose and honor a participating character you control, or your opponent chooses and dishonors a participating character he or she controls. Now, because this is a zero-cost event, our lion player can just play it, and he decides that the crane player should choose a character she controls and dishonor it. Honored and dishonored are states that can be applied to characters during the course of the game. Honored says add this character's glory to its military and political skill. Forced interrupt. When this character leaves play, gain an honor. Dishonored says subtract the glory from those skills. When this character leaves play, lose an honor. So we looked at glory briefly earlier. It's this little stat here. It makes much more sense for our crane player here to dishonor the automa courtier, partly because they're cheaper, they don't have any fate on them, so the impact of the dishonoring will last less time, but also because their glory is lower. So if they apply the dishonored stat to this character, what this means is that 1 is subtracted from both of their stats. It also means that when they leave play, the crane player will have to give up 1 honor token. So now back in the conflict, our crane player is down to strength 4, which means they don't have enough to break that province any longer. They'll have to settle for victory and the power of the ring alone, unless they've got something more up their sleeve. And it looks like they do. The crane player has this ornate fan, which is an attachment and can be played during this exchange. Attachments are items and things that give bonuses to characters that they're played on. In this case, the crane player decides to give the ornate fan to caqueta Asami, because that automa courtier is leaving this at the end of this round, and also she's dishonored. This bolsters caqueta Asami's political strength to 5 on her own. With the automa courtier, that's a total of 6 political strength, more than enough to win this conflict. So with that, it's back to our lion player, who once again has a quick look in their hand to see if there's anything they can do about this crushing defeat. It doesn't look like there is. So, with nothing left to do, the lion player passes. The crane player also passes, which means both players have consecutively passed, and it's time to resolve the conflict. So, we total the political strength. It's 6-0. This means that the crane player has won, although it's worth noting that just because the Lion's Pride Brawler didn't contribute their strength to the total at the end, that doesn't mean that this counts as unopposed. It would only be unopposed if there was no defender assigned at all. So, this means that our crane player gets the benefits of the ring. They also get to take the ring that's theirs for this conflict phase. That's important in a minute. They break the province, which means the province is turned 180 degrees upside down, and the card on top can be discarded at the discretion of the attacking player. In this case, it is the lion player's champion, so of course they're going to make the lion player get rid of that card, which is then immediately replaced. The power of the earth ring is that the crane player gets to draw a card, and the lion player has to allow the crane player to discard a card at random from his hand. The participating characters are bowed and return to their respective sides. So now the play would pass to the lion player to issue a challenge or a conflict. So our lion player was probably hanging on to this fate in order to pay for their champion next turn. But the crane player has totally dashed their hopes of doing that. There's an action window at this point before the lion player has to declare any conflicts, so they can play cards from their hand or an action on the board that's applicable. In this case, our lion player is going to play Master of the Spear to the table. Master of the Spear is an example of a character card that you get in your conflict deck. What this means is it's a character card that can be played to the surprise of your opponent during the conflict phase, provided you pay the fate cost. As with the characters played in the dynasty phase, you can overpay to put fate down on this character. So our lion player decides to go all in, playing a Master of the Spear for 3 fate, and putting down a fate token to keep them around a turn longer because he's already lost a province and he's not too happy about that. But because he took an action, she now has an opportunity to respond with an action of her own if she has something applicable. Unfortunately, none of her cards help her out in this situation, so she's going to have to let the lion player carry on with his conflict. The lion player declares a military conflict. So in this case, our lion player decides to go for a military water challenge, and he decides to take it against Doji Hotaru, who's the crane champion, in the hopes he might be able to get some revenge. The province is then revealed. We reveal the Art of Peace. When this province is broken, dishonor each attacking character and honor each defending character. Now that's got a military strength. That's got a strength of 4, which means that our attacking player here needs to get up to strength 4 in order to break it. Unfortunately, the crane player is unable to declare any defenders because she doesn't have any characters left. Unfortunately, our lion player can't get up to strength 4 in order to break that province, even with the help of the stronghold here that can give him a +1. That still only puts him on 3, not enough to break the province with strength 4. However, he does win the conflict, forcing the crane player to discard an honor for leaving the conflict undefended, and additionally gaining the power of the water ring, which allows him to ready a character or bow a character with no fate on it. In this case, he chooses to ready the Lion's Pride Brawler. The Master of the Spear is then exhausted and removed from the conflict. Then the play passes back to the crane player, who has an opportunity to initiate a conflict. Unfortunately, with no characters and no means to get any more characters, she is unable to initiate a military conflict. Play passes back to the lion player, who actually has a standing character now and can initiate a political conflict. The lion's player chooses to initiate the political conflict against the Art of Peace, once again trying to break it by achieving a strength 4 attack. In this case, the lion player decides to take a political void challenge. The void ring would allow the lion player, if he wins this, to remove a fate from a character on the board. So once again, our crane player is unable to assign any defenders, and so the conflict begins. The defender has actions first. Unfortunately, there's nothing useful that the crane player can do. Unfortunately, our lion player is all out of tricks as well, otherwise he probably would have used them earlier to protect his pilgrimage province. So again, he wins this conflict, but he doesn't get to break the Art of Peace province. Our crane player is forced to discard another honor for leaving the province undefended, and in this case, the lion player achieves another ring and removes a fate from Caqueta, Asami. The brawler is then bowed and returned to the field. Now that both players have used up all their opportunities to carry out conflicts, there's one final step to the conflict phase, which is the Contest Imperial Favour phase. These are the Imperial Favour cards. These are both actually the same. They're just double-sided. And there's political on one side and military on the other side. During the Contest Imperial Favour phase, we count all of the glory of the unbowed characters on both sides. In this case, we don't count any glory because all the characters are bowed. But if any of them were unbowed, we would just total up these glory points here. We then take those total numbers for each side and add the number of rings each side has won this round. the player with the highest score wins the Imperial Favour. In this case, it's 2 versus 1. So the Imperial Favour goes to the Lion player. He will choose whether or not to take the military or the political side at this time, and he has now got the Imperial Favour for the next round. Note that whenever anyone acquires the Imperial Favour, they can choose what side it's on. But if the contested Imperial Favour faces a draw, then the Imperial Favour remains where it is. That means that, for example, if next turn it's a draw, it will remain with the Lion player. Not only that, it will have to remain on the political side. He doesn't count as reacquiring it, so he can't change the side. However, if he were to win the contested Imperial Favour conflict, he could change the side. It's worth noting as well that in a conflict where the defender wins, the ring that was placed on the province to initiate the ring that was placed on the province to indicate the conflict is simply returned to the unclaimed ring pool. This means that the next player can choose to initiate a conflict with the same ring because no one has yet claimed it. So now we're into the fate phase. This is a very short phase in which any characters with no fate on them are discarded. In this case, our automa courtier is discarded. She goes back into the dynasty discard pile for our crane player here. Because she's dishonored, our crane player is going to lose another honor. Bad news for crane player, she lost a lot of honor this round. Each of the other characters will have one fate removed from them. We then take the remaining unclaimed rings in the ring pool and put a fate on each of those. Next turn, when a conflict is initiated with one of these rings, the player that initiated the conflict will gain that fate. Finally, we move into the regroup phase, which represents the houses getting their forces back together and getting ready to fight again. This involves readying your cards that were bowed, returning rings to the unclaimed ring pool, at this stage you will also choose whether or not to discard any face-up cards on provinces. For example, if our crane player was looking at these two face-up cards, or our lion player was looking at these two and going, that's not going to help me in the future, they could choose to discard them, and those cards would be replaced with a face-down card from the dynasty deck. It's also worth noting that if there are any face-up cards on broken provinces, those must be discarded at this time. Because the province is broken, the dynasty cards are lost in this phase. However, because this card is face down, as the crane player discarded the champion earlier, this card remains on the broken province. The last thing that happens in the regroup step is that the starting player token is passed to the other player. And with that, we're ready to go back to the dynasty phase and start the next round of Legend of the Five Rings. As I mentioned earlier, play will proceed in these 5 phases until one player reaches 25 honor, at which point they will win immediately, or a player's stronghold is broken in much the same way that provinces are broken. As you can see, the strongholds here have their own provinces, and they actually act a lot like holds, but with better abilities and that boost the province they're on. Once that is, if a player is able to break that, then they win the game immediately as well. I should also mention before I go that if at any point you run out of dynasty cards or conflict cards, then the player that's, when it comes time to draw a card from the exhausted deck, the player that's done that has to sacrifice 5 honor, which is pretty significant. They'll go back in the honor pool, then the discard pile will be shuffled, and the deck will be reset, and play will continue. Caqueta Kazin is a character in the Crane deck. He has a special ability that says, action. While this character is participating in a conflict, your opponent must choose a participating character he or she controls. Challenge that character to a military duel. If this character wins, move each character not involved in the duel home. If it loses, send it home. So what this means is essentially if you're involved in a military conflict, then caqueta could challenge an opposing character. Let's, for example, say it was this Master of the Spear here. Now, when a character is challenged, a duel begins. In a duel, players will each take their... we know this is a military duel because it says so on the caqueta card. After the duel is established, then each player will take their honor dials here and select a number between 1 and 5. The dials will be set in secret, and then they will be, once they're both set, they'll be revealed. Whoever bid higher will have to pay the difference in honor to their opponent. So in this case, our crane player would pay 3 honor to our lion player. Then the number on the dial is added to the relevant stat on the card. So in this case, 1 is added to 2 for the Master of the Spear, and the 4 is added to 3 for caqueta, making it 6 versus 3, which means caqueta wins. So in this case, move each character not involved in the duel home. So all the characters other than caqueta and the Master of the Spear would be taken out of the duel. So before I go, I thought I'd talk quickly about deck building and how you build a deck. The first thing you want to do is choose one of your 7 clans. I've got the crane deck here and the lion deck built up, but these are just the introductory decks recommended in the Learn to Play book. Unfortunately, if you only have 1 corset, then there's not a whole lot of deck building you can do. You can really just take all of the cards for 1 clan, mix in some neutral cards, and you're kind of ready to go, especially if you need to make 2 decks out of the single corset. However, if you have, if you're playing against someone who has their own corset, then you've got some more flexibility. And if you're a real competitive player and you really want to get involved into the L5R competitive play scene, then you'll probably buy 3 cores, because if you want to have all of the possible combinations you can make with the core deck, then you'll need 3 core sets, which is pretty typical for a Fantasy Flight living card game. If that sounds like way too much for you, there's still a lot of things you can do if you each have your own core set. And there's still a few interesting things you can do with a single core set as well. But in a single, if you're building out of a single core set, your deck will typically be 30 conflict cards, 30 dynasty cards, 5 provinces, and a stronghold. Now, if you're making a competitive deck, then you'll have at least 40 cards in your Destiny deck and conflict deck, but you can have up to 45. It's worth noting as well when you're deck building that you can't have more than 10 character cards in the conflict deck, so the rest will be your events and your attachments. And you can't have more than 3 of the same kind of card in the deck. You'll have, when you're building your provinces and your stronghold, obviously you pick your stronghold. There's only 1 for each clan in the core set, but I guess you'll get more different kinds of strongholds in the dynasty packs, which are the expansion packs coming out. As this is a living card game, there'll be 1 of those coming out roughly each month. So we'll get some more strongholds in there, I imagine. But those, you'll pick your clan stronghold. You can pick one of these roll cards. These roll cards are one associated with each element, and sort of give you, you've got Keeper of Fire and Seeker of Fire, so there's 2 sort of different things going on there, but these give you different deck building sort of options. For example, Keeper of Air reads, increase your deck building influence value by 3. Reaction, after you win a water conflict as the defending player, gain 1 fate. So there's really no reason you wouldn't want to include these, because they are all bonuses. None of them come with weaknesses on them. And you might be asking, well, what's influence? And I will explain that in just a minute. The last thing I want to mention is quickly on these provinces. Let's take a quick look at the provinces. So if you take a look at the 5 provinces from my lion deck here, you'll see in the bottom right corner of each province, there's a elemental symbol that corresponds to one of our 5 rings or challenge types. There they are, look at that. So in deck building, you must include in your deck a province, each province, all 5 symbols. So you get 5 provinces, but they can't have any of the same symbols unless there's something that circumvents that restriction. So with that in mind, what's influence? Well, if we grab the stronghold here, so here's Yojin no Shiro, which is my lion player's stronghold. Now remember earlier when I was talking about fate and honor and all that you start with, you also have 10 influence, which is represented by this bamboo symbol here. Now, 10 influence allows you to put in non-clan cards. What does that mean? Well, you're the lion clan. You can have as many members of the lion clan in your deck as you want. That's no restriction on that. Fill it full of lions to your heart's content. But let's say you want some dragon guys in there. Well, that's where these influence points comes in. Now, it's worth noting that in the corset, there are no dynasty cards with influence values on them, which means that if you're going to include some cards from other clans in your deck using your influence, you can't take dynasty cards, only the conflict cards. Again, this might change with later card additions and packs and stuff. So we have here our dragon cards. Now if we look at our dragon conflict cards here, we can see that each one has some bamboo shoots on the bottom. This means that you can pay that number of bamboo shoots to include this in your deck. You can include up to 10 bamboo shoots worth of cards from other decks. Cards that have no bamboo shoots cannot be included in the deck. Probably also important to mention that if you do decide to include dragons in your lion deck by paying influence points to put them in there, you can only include dragons. So these influence points allow you to include one other clan in your deck and no more than that. So I hope that's cleared up for you how to play the game. But if you're still feeling a little confused or a little unsure of yourself, or you just kind of want to see how the flow goes, especially with the conflicts and the interplay and all the different things that the players will be thinking about there, Barry and I will be sitting down tomorrow and we're going to play a game out of this single corset that we've got here. So we might be trying to put together some more interesting decks. We might just use these starter decks here, I'm not sure. But we'll be sitting down tomorrow to play a game. So come back and check that out. And hopefully I'll see you all there. Thanks for watching.